Yes, sir.
Yes, so good evening, everybody. Today's discussion is regarding COVID-19 crisis and India's latest stimulus package, which we know is amongst the largest in the world. So the combined package works out to say roughly 10% of the GDP, making it amongst the most substantial packages in the world. After the financial packages announced by some of the countries like say the United States, which is 13% of its GDP, and Japan, which is over 21% of its GDP. So this mega rupees 20 lakh crore stimulus package, which was announced last month by the Prime Minister, also includes previously announced measures to save this lockdown battered economy. And it also focuses on things like small tax breaks for small businesses and incentives for domestic manufacturing. And it also includes the rupees 1.7 lakhs crore package for free food grains to poor and things like cash to poor women and elderly. And it also includes the Reserve Bank's liquidity measures and interest rate cuts. So while the package which was announced in March of this year was around 0.8% of GDP, now, with all the interest cut in interest rates and the liquidity boosting measures, now that percentage has gone up to say 3.2% of the GDP. While addressing the nation for the third time over the COVID-19 pandemic, the Prime Minister said that a special economic package is being announced to make India self-reliant. And this package, taken together with earlier announcements, uh, government during COVID-19 crisis and decisions taken by the RBI, is like I told you, to the tune of rupees 20 lakh crores, which is equivalent to almost 10% of India's GDP. So all of us knew that all of us know that most of the economic activities in the country had come to a standstill after the government imposed a 21-day national lockdown, which began on 25th of March. And since then, the lockdown had been extended twice and thrice. And after some relaxation, now the resumption of the economy has started. And like I said, the package seems to focus on different areas such as land, labor, liquidity, and different laws which govern economic activities. And it also aims to cater to various sections and sectors such as MSMEs, cottage industry, the laborers, the middle class, the businesses, the industries. But certain proposals such as giving full tax exemption to companies, making new investment of a minimum threshold in sectors, say such as medical devices, electronics, telecom equipment, and capital goods have been criticized and said to be under consideration uh, uh, in terms of say inadequate to tackle the current crisis. And the investment in things like infrastructure has also been criticized to not being enough to cater to the different challenges which these sectors are facing. So in light of all these issues, what we plan to do today is have a general discussion on what this fiscal stimulus means for India. And we basically plan to dissect this fiscal stimulus on different agendas, which you can see on your screen via the screen that I have shared. And on principle, we would not like to make this a very technical discussion in terms of talking about technical economic ideas or technical economic equations. We'll try to keep the discussion as general and possible and try to have a layman's discussion on what these economic changes and packages mean to these key and critical sectors. And at the same time, we'll try to compare the approach of the Indian government to the approach of different middle income emerging markets. And in the end, we'll try to focus a bit more on the Hindi heartlands such as Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and see whether all these combined announced welfare measures are enough for states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, which are low-income states and are facing one of the biggest crises of independent India in the form of reverse labor migration and loss of employment and livelihood at a very, very big scale. So I'd like to bring in Chandan in this discussion and probably start with the first point of our discussion, which is basically an overview of all the fiscal stimulus efforts which have been undertaken by India, and whether or not this fiscal response is can be termed as adequate. So, Chandan, what are your views on this fiscal stimulus efforts? What are in totality these efforts, and whether or not you see these efforts as an adequate response?
Hi everyone. I hope I'm audible, Harshit.
Yes, yes, you are.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Harshit, coming to the point, I think the approach of the government is very, if you see the announcement of the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan as the government
Excuse
is
me,
trying to
sir.
call
Now
it,
sound is not
is
coming
a
properly from the
pattern.
Chandan's.
I think
Am I
there's
not
a
audible?
yes, yes, you're audible. There's a little issue of probably the voice getting lagged, but continue. We'll see if it is lagging anymore or not.
Yeah, fine. I will just interrupt if my voice is not audible. Okay, I'll start all over again.
Yes, I think a couple of people have written that the voice
Yeah,
is
so
cracking. So you can continue. You can continue.
okay, I'll continue. See, what I'm saying that there is a pattern to the government approach which is very clearly visible in this entire term of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, as the government like to call it. And the pattern, if you see, is there's a strong supply side push, availability of capital in easy terms. Now, as you have already said, that we'll not go into the technicality of economics, but everybody understands most fact that there is a demand push and there is a supply side push. There's a entire fiscal stimulus, the government like to call it, is basically a strong supply side push. Doing what? By boosting availability of capital in easy terms, that there should be easyability of loans for various sectors, MSME and different businesses. Keep income and wage schemes to the minimum. Now, this is important. They have tried to keep the income and the wage support schemes to the minimum, as in doles are not on the agenda of this government right now. Then to empower constituencies ranging from farmers and workers, business, and find the most important, keep the demand as low as possible. So these are the bullets you can see what the government has tried to achieve from this stimulus. Try to a strong push to the supply side, boosting availability on pretty easy this is for get minimum, as in not direct benefit of direct and not providing any sort of income supporting measures that they're completely
Chandan, sorry to interject. I think your voice is not clear at all to most of the participants, and that's what they're writing in the chat section. So can you just try disconnecting and joining once again, because not discernible what you're trying to say.
Okay, great. Am I audible now?
Lot better, a lot better.
Yeah, fine. So what I'm trying to say, I hope I was able to communicate few of the points which I made.
No, it'll be better if you can just go back and start at the beginning.
Okay, I'll start at the beginning. See, what I'm trying to say is that this entire initiative of the government is basically to push the supply side, like make the availability of capital on easy terms and keep income and wage support schemes to the minimum. Am I clear? Everybody's able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Now it's okay.
Okay, good. And then empower constituencies ranging from farmers and workers to businesses. And finally, the most important, which I think all the countries are focusing on, is to keep the damage to the economy as low as possible. So these are the targets of this has been the target of the Indian government when they announced this fiscal stimulus. Now, Harshit said, is it enough? That was the question. I think in economic structure of ours, or in any emerging market, developing economy and developed economy, no amount of money and no kind of fiscal stimulus is ever going to be enough. But yes, there have been measures which has been taken by the government, because the government can only act according to the availability of resources on their end. They cannot go on and print currency and keep pumping money in the market, because that will lead to a different katina of problems altogether. So this is what I would like to start with, that there has been a strong supply side push pattern which is visible through this entire package. And availability of credit has been the major focus of this government. And they have not started, or they have not initiated anything which has to do with doles. They have kept it at pause. The finance minister has said that if the push comes to shove, we might go on giving more money straight money into the hands of the people who need it. But till now, they have not done that. So this is my overview of this entire fiscal stimulus to start with. To you,
Okay,
Harshit.
fair point. You mentioned that in a country as big and with so many economic sectors to spend on, it's very difficult to gauge at this stage whether the response is enough or not. And I think 10% of the economy, in my opinion, is a very big response to whatever is going on. But at the same time, when we go into the specifics of what this 10% comprises, I think that would be a much better insight into what exactly is happening. So like you can see on the screen, the third talking point, which is the approach of the government of India, and whether loan generates capacity, and whether loan generates capacity, but does it create demand? So just for the benefit of our audience, I'll explain as to what that means. So if you look at the different measures that the government of India has taken, the government has gone ahead and, like I said in the beginning, increase the liquidity of most of the banks by asking the RBI to cut on the interest rates. At the same time, the government has asked people to spend more, has asked these businesses to take loans and spend in the market. But we also have to appreciate that all of these measures, such as putting a moratorium on the payment of loan and deferring the interest payment as well as the loan payment. But we have to appreciate that all of these measures are in the nature of loans being given to people. So while most of the economists, major economists of the world, such as specifically in the context of India, economists like Abhijit Banerjee, they have gone ahead and clearly stated that while granting of loan can generate capacity, in the sense that it can allow people to spend more, it can allow people short-term benefits in the form of allowing them to invest in their businesses. But it does not create demand in the sense that people know that this is a money that they have to return at certain point of time in the future. So whether or not this approach of doling out loans and this entire relief focusing mostly on loans and not direct benefit in terms of, say, cash transfer or giving people money which they can utilize for demand, whether this approach can be called to be an adequate approach or not. So I would like your thoughts on this.
As I said, Harshit, initially, that the government's push or the government's focus in this time has been to cater to the supply side. And why they have done that, if I can make an assumption, is because they want to restart this entire economy. Because see what has happened due to this COVID crisis, the economy has come to a standstill. The productions have stopped. Okay, so the government is trying to revive the entire economy by allowing these businesses, these industry to start producing again, to make them able to stand on their feet. Now, they are doing this by providing credit. Now, if you see, you're right when you say that credit is something which eventually the companies or the individual has to return. But what the government has done, if you see very closely, they have given a broad framework or broad timeline for even for making those payments on those loans. They have not said that we will do it in 1 year or 2 years. They have given an approx almost a 4-year, 5-year timeline horizon for to these entrepreneurs, to these business class, that you can take loan right now, and then we will give you a proper time frame in which you can pay these loans. And the good thing is, if you see certain areas in which the government has given this facility of providing loans, they have waived off the condition of collaterals, which is a welcome initiative, which is a welcome move, because giving out collateral or keeping collateral is not easy for a lot of businesses. Because in India, if you see, micro, small and medium enterprises contributes almost 60 to 70% to the GDP of the country. And not all of them could possibly have a proper collateral to put to the banks and then avail loan facility or credit facility. So they have waived off collateral in certain areas, which is, again, I said, a welcome move. And they have given a good time frame for these people to pay back their loans. So yes, it's a welcome move that these loans are supposed to be paid on a broad time horizon, and they have waived off collaterals. What I'll also like to point out is that government has changed the definition of also micro, small and medium enterprises. They have increased the turnover amount. I'll not get into technicality what it is, but they have increased the turnover amount for classifying micro, small and medium enterprises so that they could compete in international markets, they could get more export benefits, and they can avail more loans. So these are the areas where I'll say the initiative by the government is a welcome move, because what they have tried to focus here is to boost the production side. Like if the business is closed due to COVID and there are no profits and there's no production, how will they stand? How will they revive themselves? They will revive by taking money from the banks. They will try to increase the production. And if the production increases, there will be more labor. They can hire more people. So it's a vicious cycle. It can support the entire economy. But again, I'll say it's a far-fetched, it's a little, what should I say? It's a little long-drawn process. But right now, we should have as we'll say in our suggestions also, what they should have focused. But this is what the idea or the intention of the government has been in this particular case. Yes, Harshit.
Yes, I'd just like to add a little, add a slightly different view on that collateral, on the point of collateral. So while it is fair to mention that in some sectors collateral has been removed and people are allowed loans without even say having a proper security, but in most of the sectors, such as say production for these small enterprises and especially homegrown businesses. So while the RBI has boosted liquidity and most of these banks are being given a lot of money to provide loans, but at the same time, this is a bit of an eye wash, because while these liquidity boosting measures seem a lot on paper, and the RBI can boast of boosting liquidity in terms of whether or not it has allowed the banks to go ahead and give these loans. But because of this existence of a collateral, this money is not exactly being this money is not exactly getting into the market, because of two simple reasons. Number one, like I mentioned, some of the sectors are still asking for collateral, and in the current environment, it is difficult for small businesses to provide that collateral. And second, even most of these businesses, given the current market, given the current general economic environment, are not willing to give that collateral, even if they have collateral, because they don't know how the next 6 months or the next 1 year is going to fare out for them. So probably the government can either waive off collateral in, say, all the major sectors, especially for these small businesses, because of this simple blockade of the market actually getting into the market and not just staying into the banks. And secondly, what we are also witnessing is that the banks are, even after getting money from the RBI, are going ahead and depositing that money back to the RBI under the reverse repo window. So probably the RBI can find a mechanism where this reverse repo window system can be strengthened, and the banks can be forced to dish out that money. Because, like you mentioned, even though we are focusing on the supply side of things, but if we do not spend more, if we do not focus on the demand side, I personally do not see any way by which the growth rate, as we like to call it, can even move to say 4% or 4 points or 5 points in the next couple of financial years. So if you can provide your views on that, probably after that we can close this discussion point and move to the other.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Harshit. See, reaching to that 4% or the 5% of the magical figure is going to be a distant dream. The governor of the RBI himself said that we cannot expect a V-shaped recovery from the Indian economy. Max to max, it's going to be a W-shaped recovery. Now, coming to your point, it's absolutely right that the government assumes this or operates on this assumption that just because they have announced this collateral free loan, everybody will flock to the banks to avail loans. First, that is not happening. Second, we forget the major stakeholder in this discussion when we're talking about loans and collateral. It's the banks, which are the major stakeholders. The public sector banks as well as the private sector banks in India are reeling under the enormous pressure of non-performing assets, NPA. It's almost 9% or 9.5%. Now, if you give collateral-free loans to these enterprises, you are again burdening the banks. Just because the government is providing guarantee to the loans, it's okay, fine. The government is acting as a guarantor. But the government also has a limit to its resources. If people who are availing loans if they fail to repay, the government cannot or should not be expected to substitute for their payments. So this is going to be a major issue. It will create more burden on the assets or of the banks. It might lead to more increase in the non-performing assets of the banks. And that is why banks are also reluctant to give loans. The government announces, fine, go to the bank and collect collateral-free loans. But are banks giving out these loans? How do we know? Because on paper and what is happening on the ground are two different realms, or it's a completely different reality. The government dishes out, like we have seen in the case of reduction in repo rate. The RBI reduces the repo rate, but that reduction or the benefit is not immediately transferred to the consumers or the beneficiaries. So banks will be very skeptical to lend. And see, my entire issue with all this is that you are again asking these people to borrow. So how it is a stimulus? How it is it's supporting them? You're asking them to go and get loan, which eventually they have to pay, and that too with interest. So how it's a stimulus or a package, whatever fancy word you can use, I fail to see that. Because giving out loans, we are not giving interest-free loans. You're not asking them, fine, take the money and don't pay back. It's not. These are not grants. These are not aids. These are specifically called loans. And eventually loans had to be paid back. So these people, whosoever businessmen and all these entrepreneurs, they go and take loan, they will eventually have to pay back. And that too, when we are operating on this assumption that banks are willing to lend. So that's a catch-22 situation. Will the banks be able to pass on these benefits, first of all? And secondly, even if the banks are willing to pass on these benefits, do we expect every entrepreneur, every small, medium and micro scale business person to just go and run to the banks and take loans? No, they will not, because eventually they'll have to pay back the loans. And they are not sure for 6 months, 1 year, or even for 2 years down the line that will the economy revive to its own. Will they be able to go back to what it was pre-corona days? And let me tell you, pre-corona days was not very, it was not as great as people think it was. Nothing was hunky-dory then. So that's also an issue which I personally feel is a major problem with this. You are giving them loans, and it's a discretion of these people to go and take loans. What if these people decide, I will not go and take loans? Then what happens to the fiscal stimulus? Will you still call it a stimulus?
Yes, and that's a fair point. So I'll probably move to another point of discussion, and then we can discuss the the creation of an adequate fiscal space point. So I would just like your opinion on this small little thing that is being proposed by certain economists. If you listen to debates on the television or read their obits in newspapers, so we have seen that say some rich countries, even in the Asian region, such as countries like Singapore, so they have managed to tap into their deep reserve kitty and benefit from the significant role that is played by their sovereign wealth fund. So while India does not have that luxury, because India do not have the concept of something like a sovereign wealth fund or welfare fund, but it has also been suggested, like I told you, by certain corners in op-eds and in TV interviews, that the country's $476 billion of the foreign exchange reserves. So those foreign exchange reserves be used for this purpose. That is betterment of the economy. So, however, this is an extremely risky option, and this is especially in light of India's, say, the sizable current account deficit, and also the heavy dependence on India's short-term capital inflows. So, given the likely pressure on its balance of payments moving forward, so where do you see utilizing forex reserves as a viable or a feasible method at this point?
Hello.
You're audible. You're audible.
Yeah, you can repeat. I can just repeat your last point, last question. The question.
So, in short, I'll just summarize. Some economists have suggested using India's foreign exchange reserves to alleviate this economic crisis. And they're relying on examples of countries like Singapore, which have used their sovereign wealth funds. So, do you think this is a viable option that is tapping into the forex reserve to probably better the economic condition, especially in light of the fact that India has a huge current account deficit and is dependent heavily on its short-term capital inflows?
Okay. See, before I answer that, the question I want to ask, or I ask myself, is if we allow to use our foreign exchange or foreign reserve, what it would be used for? That is the major question. Are you going to use it again, as I said, a demand side push or a supply side push? If you are willing to use that money to provide, to give it directly to the hand of the people, then I think it is a viable option. But if you are again not willing to give it directly to the hand of the people to spend, then I don't think that's a viable option. Fine, because we need to focus on the fact that why we need this money, whatever be the resource, foreign exchange reserve or printing of currencies, why use this money, where we want to use this money. Because see, if you see the entire structure of the Indian economy, unlike China, India is a consumption based economy. We consume. We're not a manufacturing based economy like China. So we are a consumption based economy. And when I say consumption based economy, it means people in this country, they consume. There is a lot of demand. Okay. So what COVID has done, if people have gone jobless, they don't have money in their hands to spend. So if there's no money, there is no demand, hence there is no production. And again, that the vicious cycle of the Great Depression or the economic recession starts. So what I have been trying to suggest, or what the economists have also suggested, is that give money directly to these people. 6,000, 5,000, 7,000, that amount is debatable. That amount can vary from person to person, and it's the prerogative of the government to decide the amount. But if you give the amount directly to the individual or the person concerned or the family, it will boost the demand. And once the demand is back, it won't take an economy as huge as an Indian economy to bounce back again. So my entire issue is that why demand side is not being considered. And again, just bear with me for 2 minutes. I'll give you some numbers, because any discussion on economics is not complete without numbers. Now see, the central government planned to spend 30,000 crore in the current year. Fine. The revenue side would be financed by borrowing. And the amount was somewhere around 7 lakh or 8 lakh crore. Now, this was the budgeted fiscal deficit, which is equivalent to 5% of the GDP, which is well within the allowed scope of FRBM. Now, if you borrow more, how will you spend more? Let's understand this in a common man. When will you spend more? आप खर्च ज़्यादा कब करेंगे? जब आपके पास पैसा ज़्यादा आएगा, तब आप खर्च करेंगे. खर्च करेंगे तो डिमांड बढ़ेगी. Abhi, what the government is doing, they are borrowing to fill the gap to already pay for existing loans. So how will they increase the expenditure? They are doing gap filling. They have borrowed the money. They have generated almost 4.2 lakh crores. Fine. To do what? To fill the gap, which they expected that their revenue would be, but their revenue is not that much. So to bridge that gap, they are borrowing the money. So that borrowing is not going in the form of expenditure as it should go, and it should have happened ideally. That is where the entire problem is. Additional borrowing would be a fiscal stimulus only if it was used to provide cash and other forms of support to the poorest families at the bottom half of the population. To do what? To restart the completely stalled economy, which has not happened here. So this is what my take is. Now, summarizing what you said, the Forex reserve, I don't think it should be touched, especially if you are again going to focus on supply side. If you are willing to focus on demand side, then foreign exchange can be touched, but I will not venture into that territory. That's a very tricky and slippery slope. Foreign exchange should not be touched because, as you have pointed out rightly, our current account deficit is huge. There can, anytime there can be a balance of payment crisis, and moreover, our currency is not that strong when compared to the US dollar. So a currency which is 75 or 76 rupee per dollar and can go into free fall, I don't think RBI will be very willing, or the government would be very willing to touch the foreign exchange.
Yeah, and especially in light of the fact that China is now in Ladakh, so I don't think that's something that we should resort to.
Why would you say that? Huh?
Anyway, moving to the next talking point, which I think, in my opinion, is the most important talking point. That is creation of an adequate fiscal space, and whether
I think there's somebody is raising his hand. Naveen Mehta, I think, has a question. He's raised.
Naveen, you can go ahead and ask that question. Yeah.
Okay.
I think just a sec. I think you should type your question instead of saying, because the voice is cracking. So anybody who has question, kindly type in the message and we will take it. Okay.
It will take a lot of time.
No, it's not about taking a lot of time. Your voice is cracking. We are not able to hear it properly. So it will be better if you type the question, then we can take it. Yeah, Harshit, you can go on.
Okay. So the next talking point would be creation of an adequate fiscal space. And like I was saying, prioritizing where we are spending as a country. So what we have seen is that countries like India, which already have a very high public debt levels, and countries like these which are already struggling with problems of debt. So these countries need to be particularly concerned as to as they also have to possess the least of state capacity to make tough decisions as far as returning to a trajectory of fiscal credibility is concerned. Now, this COVID-19 crisis has made it clear that the countries have to build an adequate fiscal space to manage future economic distresses of these nature, of nature which arise out of, say, health crisis or any other socio-economic crisis. So, given the acute constraints on fiscal policy in India, so do you think there is a clear need to start reprioritizing expenditure in the sense that we have to remove expenditure from low priority areas, unproductive areas, and move towards greater spending in, say, on areas such as health infrastructure, probably social safety networks, and especially in light of the fact that due to this crisis, the low-income households have suffered a lot. We have seen this entire crisis of reverse migration. We have seen a lot of low-income groups losing jobs. So, where do you see the role? And like you were mentioning in your previous statement, you were mentioning the importance of things like direct cash transfer and direct benefit transfer. So, first question: whether or not do you see a need for reprioritizing and reallocation? And secondly, if at all we are going to reprioritize and reallocate, how exactly are we going to do that?
Okay. First of all, it's a very good question, because in a country like India, where we have limited resources, prioritizing our resources should be a top priority. So yes, I think this is an eye opener for the entire nation, and the government has taken a note of this also, because 1% and 2% of GDP on health is not going to solve the problem of a country of 130 crore people. I think that's established. That's established fact, and that nobody's doubting it now. Now we have to increase that GDP or the expenditure on the health and create a good infrastructure, health infrastructure. So yes, prioritizing is very important, but I think it's easier said than done, because you see, the problem with, as we have already said this again and again in every session, that problem with a country as huge as India, it's easier to say things than to do it and implement it in a practical manner. Like, establishing a health infrastructure is always the priority. But if you see the current scheme of things in health in India, 90% of healthcare is being provided by private sector. 64% beds available in the entire hospitals in India belongs to private sector. And even in these kind of testing times, private sector has not been very considerate. I was reading today only that a bill was 19 lakh was generated for a COVID patient in Calcutta to hand over for his or her discharge. That's preposterous. But the problem is that our entire healthcare model is not based on prevention. It's after the thing has happened, we react. Now it's I'll say it's easier said than done, because to create an infrastructure which will stop it from happening, or to inculcate or to establish a preventive model, is a very difficult task, because in India, there are not only one diseases we have to pay attention to. Unlike developed countries where there is one or two life-threatening diseases, India has like every disease you can think of, we are facing an issue with. Tuberculosis, malaria, TB, typhoid, jaundice, Japanese encephalitis. Every state has its own specific type of disease. That's why health has been kept in the state subject, because states are in a better position to act when it comes to health, because they are more aware of what is affecting their area, what is affecting their population. The problem in Jammu Kashmir is not the same as problem in Tamil Nadu, because of the climate and the geography and everything. So health should be a priority, but you need to empower states to do that. And how to empower? To give them more financial autonomy, to decide them what is good for them, what is right and what is wrong. I was very happy to read yesterday that the GST balance or the dues has released by the center to various states. And now they have got a lot of money of their GST dues, which was pending. So that's a good thing. So that's how it should be. The priority is absolutely important. We need to prioritize. We need to focus on education. I think, Harshit, if you remember last session, we discussed the need of teaching people about healthcare, right, at the school level.
Right.
Yes, the importance of health. Now, these things need to be done on a very grassroots level. And that's why I have always been a very strong believer in this fact that there has to be a short-term goal and there has to be a long-term goal. These are long-term goals. These things you cannot do overnight. These things you cannot do, I will not even in 5 years. These are structural anomalies which need to be fixed, and it will take time. But now, coming to the point on the the focus of the discussion, amidst all this, we need to focus our attention to RBI. Like, what RBI has done in this crisis has nothing short of phenomenal, because reducing the repo rate and then open market operation has boosted liquidity in banking systems in almost excess of 5 lakh crores, and this has never been done by RBI. Now, that's one of the most sweeping steps which has been taken by the central bank in the time of crisis. And this will boost liquidity. This will ease stress in the banking sector. And this will help NBFCs, which are a major stakeholder. Like measures for NBFCs, such as providing a 30,000 crore liquidity facility and a 45,000 crore partial credit guarantee, and then again a 50,000 crore refinancing facility for NABARD, SIDBI, will go a long way in solving these issues of liquidity availability. Because see, eventually it all boils down to the availability of liquidity in the market. And when I say liquidity, it means availability of cash in the market. If there is cash in the market, then there will be enough for the people to consume, demand will be there, and there'll be production also. But if there is not enough liquidity in the market, if there is no money in the market, then I don't see anything happening, anything good coming out of it. So institutions in India have really taken the challenge, and they have done really well. I can think on top of my head has done very extremely phenomenal job when it comes to the requirement of meetings where the repo rate and all this considered, and there are dates where these are taken up, but they have done it prior to the dates. They have been proactive, which is the need of the hour. So yes, your question is again summarizing. Priority is important, but we never should forget the fact that the resources in a country, or any country, even the world's richest country, will say that they don't have enough resources. So that needs to be prioritized, and we need to set our goals very clearly. We should have short-term goals. And what should be their short-term goals? To give money directly to the people, to boost the demand in the economy. And what should be the long-term goals? The long-term goal should be to shift our priority
I think your voice is cracking yet again. There's something wrong.
focus more on health, focus more on education, and make the private sector country like India, where one flu or a fever to push them into below poverty line. That's how precarious the situation is. Back to you, Harshit.
Okay, noted. That's a fair point. But when you mention short-term goals, there's something else that comes to my mind. It's fine that we make short-term goals and long-term goals, but if you talk about the situation which is existing as we speak, so what in my opinion, and I'd also like you to come in now, because this is something that requires a policy framework, and you will be in a best position to tell us how exactly a policy can be framed and whether or not the government is looking forward to deal with this with some kind of a policy intervention. So basically what is happening right now, if you look at states like, and I think Delhi is the best example to take right now. I'll just narrate two incidents, two different but specific incidents which happened in Delhi in the past 1 week. So now, as we know, Delhi has unofficially stopped testing for this COVID-19. At the same time, Delhi is running on full capacity. That is to say that there are no more beds available in the government hospitals of Delhi. And what happened was, around 3-4 days back, there was a lady who works at the Gates Foundation, a very well-known lady, quite popular on Twitter. So she was at the gates of LNJP hospital in Delhi with her critical dad, and he was not able to, he had COVID-19, he was not able to breathe properly. And they had to wait on the gates of LNJP for 5 hours. And even then, they were not allowed entry inside. So after that, they begged and they went down on their knees in front of, say, 5 to 6 senior doctors. And then the doctors came and saw exactly what the status of the patient was. And then they said that he needs to be kept on oxygen immediately. And then 10 minutes after he was kept on oxygen, the patient expired. Now, the other incident that I would like to narrate is something that happened today. There's an ex-member of parliament, quite famous personality. His niece was suffering from coronavirus in Delhi. And we know that an ex-member of parliament is somebody who has resources, somebody who is connected, and somebody who is privileged enough to get a hospital bed. But even that member of parliament had to wait for a very long period of time to get a hospital bed for his niece. And then uh, hours after he managed a hospital bed for her, even though she was critical, she was not kept on ventilator, she was not taken to the ICU because there was no ventilator, because all the ICUs were full, and she expired later in the day. So what we are witnessing right now is that state capacity is zero. There is no availability of health infrastructure, and the cases of COVID-19 are only rising. The graph is nowhere, let alone flattening. The graph is not even static. It's a graph that is continuously in the nature of an upward graph. So, where is the current policy intervention? Do we have any plan as far as medical infra is concerned, or like uh, like the Prime Minister said, are all of us on our own now? Because that I personally cannot see any policy intervention. And like you said, some of us who can probably afford private healthcare, and even subject, and that is subject to condition that private healthcare is adequate enough to deal with this pandemic in terms of having the right PPEs and the medical kits to test, and then the ventilators and the ICUs. So, where does the government have any policy intervention plan, or is this something that we are going to witness for a long period of time now?
Okay. See, I don't think anybody was prepared for this. You can never be prepared for a pandemic. And as I have said, you have also pointed out, we have discussed this earlier also. It does not, in India, in a country like India, doesn't take a corona to expose the glaring loopholes in the system, especially the health. And as we have pointed out, as you have said, that if you spend 1% of your GDP on health, then this is bound to happen. Even you're saying private, even if I can afford, even if I'm in a position to afford, I cannot afford a 19 lakh bill in a private sector hospital. Do you think you can afford a 19 lakh rupee bill? No, I don't think so. So that's why I said these are something which will take time. This is something which will take time. But yes, government has acted, like they have said, and it has been in public also, that the number of PPE kits which the government has manufactured is on its all-time high. Now, let's be rational here. Nobody in like, if the business is usual, nobody would be producing PPE kits to such extent. It's only in situations like this when you realize that, okay, you need to prioritize what you need. You need PPE kits. That's why the government has scaled the production of PPE kits. It has scaled the number of beds. Railway coaches were converted into quarantine beds. Primary healthcare center were converted into quarantine center. I'm not saying these are enough. This can never be enough for 130 crore population. But yes, these things have been done. Policy level, I don't think this is a policy level decision. This is something which, like, extreme situation or desperate situation demand desperate measures kind of a initiative or a step. You are right when you say that these things need to be covered by policy. A constitution provides us right to life. Constitution provides me and you right to live with dignity. Where is the dignity of that? Where is the dignity when an individual has to kneel before a doctor to get himself admitted in the hospital? Where is the right to life in that? If I have to kneel before a doctor and a hospital, I have to travel from pillar to post, to run from pillar to post to get myself admitted in a hospital. So these are the problems with the infrastructure, health infrastructure we are talking about. And this needs to be catered to. You cannot just move on and say, fine, corona has happened and these many people have died, let's move on. No, you cannot move on. Even death of a single individual, somebody has to be accountable. We are talking about human lives. Now see from the other side, what the problem I face being in a government, what normal people don't understand. It's very difficult, Harshit, to make a balance between economy and health. It's the same debate as economy and climate. Okay, you need to find a middle ground. You need to find a way, a balance. I'm not saying that you can compromise. I just said 10 seconds back that you cannot afford even a single individual to die. But there are people, you have seen the images, you have read the stories. There are migrant workers who are saying that we'll rather die of hunger. So health is not the only issue. They have been sent back to their native places. They have been sent back to UP and Bihar. What next? Do you think they will be able to stay in UP and Bihar for like 3 years, 4 years, or even 3-4 months? Some genius will say, let them do agriculture. Agriculture is a seasonal occupation. It cannot keep you engaged for 12 months a year. So what is the alternative? Many implications. There's so, see a country like US pumped almost $6 trillion into economy. The day Boeing gets $220 billion, it fires half of its employees. Billionaires have increased their wealth. Jeff Bezos has earned $225 billion more during this pandemic. So I don't know where we are going. I don't know what is wrong. There are people who are making crazy money even during this pandemic. And there are people, I cannot forget that I cannot take eating a dog's carcass on the road. So you see the stark difference. So yes, it has to be covered by policies. We have policies. We have right to life. We have Article 21. And the government, I'll be very blunt and say the government cannot take this excuse that we don't have money, we don't have money. I think you pointed this right, this last previous time, that basic human rights, every government should have money. How can you deny basic human rights on the ground of lack of resources or lack of money? And I think the government has realized this. That's why if you see in this economic tranche, they have increased the budget for Manrega by almost 2/3. They have added 40,000 crores to Manrega, which will help these people to stay in their places if they have gone to Bihar and UP, because Manrega will keep them engaged. The number of days, minimum days for working in Manrega has also been increased from 100 to 200, if I'm not wrong. So yes, that's also an agenda of that is very visible, the idea of the government, to keep these people employed, to keep these people working, to provide money to directly to them. That's why increasing the budget for Manrega was a very good move. Transferring 500 rupee to every woman in her Jan Dhan account was a very good move, because empowering women is like empowering the country and empowering the society. There is no denying that. Giving them grains directly was a very good move. It's a very good move. And one of the most laudable moves was to make this idea of ration cards universal. I think you'll also appreciate it, that even if I have a ration card in Patna or Bihar, I can still use it if I'm in Karnataka. So these are good moves. They are catering to these downtrodden, these vulnerable sections, which is absolutely important, because pandemic or no pandemic, it's the vulnerables who always has to bear the major brunt of it. I think that's why they're called vulnerables. And we need to take care of these people. And government has been, I think, ably aided by civil society. Government has been aided by the masses. The people have really stood up. But the point is that it's not the job of the people. I have voted for a government. I have selected my leaders. They should be accountable. I will be asking questions to them. I cannot ask Harshit from you. I should question the government. Hey, I've chosen you. What are you doing? Fine, I'll do whatever I can on my personal level. But the accountability of the government, it's between me and the government. It's not between me and Harshit. There is no social contract between me and Harshit. It's between me and the government. So me asking question does not make me a rebel or a anti-national or something like that. That's my right, and the government should answer it. So the fiscal stimulus has pros, and they miss certain points. The entire point they missed is they have focused on supply side. I don't think that was unintentional. It was a deliberate attempt on their part to focus on supply side first, because the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister very categorically stated that if push comes to shove, we'll focus on the demand side if the situation worsens. So that's why they have focused on the supply side. Catering to the poor via Manrega and giving them grains and transferring money to them, 500 rupee, was a good move. And this is what I think they have done. And this is what my 2 cents on it. To you, Harshit.
Yeah, fair point. I'll quickly move to the last point of discussion, because we have already covered MSMEs and the health and social safety networks for the poor via Manrega and other plans. So quickly, talking about a state-specific stimulus for states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and what are the challenges that these states in the Hindi heartland specifically face when any of these, say, big packages or big relief measures are announced? And I specifically kept this talking point as one of the major talking points because of two reasons. And I'll quickly elaborate on that. And then probably after you respond to that for, say, 2 to 5 minutes, we can move to the questions. So the reason why I say, or reason why I assume that states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh or Jharkhand, they do not usually respond well to these welfare measures are twofold. Number one, the general awareness and lack of industrialization, which is a very, very common general point, which I think everybody knows. But when I say lack of awareness, I also mean lack of things like basic financial literacy. So you very rightly mentioned Jan Dhan and other similar measures which have been taken by the government of India. And the latest data shows that 80% adults in India have Jan Dhan accounts. But we also know that the problem with most of these Jan Dhan accounts is that many of these, or in fact, a significant number of these Jan Dhan accounts are dormant accounts, and they are zero balance accounts in which there's almost no money, and they have attained a dormant status because of two reasons. One, either the government has been unable to say make people aware as to how banking is done. There has been no focus on financial literacy drives, and secondly, for probably people who rely on day-to-day cash transactions do not see bank transfers or probably bank transferring via bank mechanism as a very viable method of doing transactions. And this may happen due to a lot of reasons. Probably there are not enough networks of banks. So these are some of the reasons that may cause this. And because of these dormant, non-operational bank accounts under Jan Dhan scheme, most of these banks are also bearing a lot of transactional, not transactional, but operational cost in the sense that they have to pay to manage these bank accounts. But at the same time, these bank accounts show no activity. So this is the first question. My second question is, there's another reason why states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh or Jharkhand or even in some cases Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, they do not show a lot of activity even after fiscal stimulus. This is owing to the reason that most of these states are still working on a rent-seeking mechanism. So what do I mean when I say this rent-seeking mechanism? So what happens is most of these states, even though in principle feudalism is over, even though in principle there's equal opportunities and there's land reform, but we know how things happen in these states. So what we are seeing, and even there's data to suggest this, that even though zamindars have gone, it is now the local netas, the municipal councillors, the civil servants, the municipal commissioners, the executive officers of the nagar panchayats. So what they do is, whenever money is allocated, say 100 crores is allocated for a gram panchayat, so they take this money and they put this money in their personal bank account. And whatever money is then allocated for the development work goes out of the personal bank account of that functionary. Now, how is it different from other states, say like Kerala or Tamil Nadu? Is that even though there's corruption in Kerala or Tamil Nadu or states like Karnataka, the amount of corruption and the extent of corruption differs in the sense that the money is first allocated to the development project, and the peripheral and the antecedent amount is probably used for, say, warming pockets or any kind of corruption work. But in states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, the money first goes to a personal bank account, by which I mean the rent-seeking mechanism, and then that money goes out for, say, the development work. So keeping these two broad points into account, how do you see this particular stimulus actually becoming beneficial to states like Bihar and Jharkhand and Uttar Pradesh, especially in light of the fact that these are the countries which are hard hit the most by this reverse migration drive, And now these states do not exactly know how to deal with these 10 lakh, 20 lakh, 30 lakh people who have suddenly entered the state. And how do they provide to them? And we have seen that states like Bihar, they have openly said that they do not have any plan in place. And we have even seen statements made by office dignitaries, statements reeking of class bias, where they have said that they see the crime rate going above because they don't have a plan in place, and these migrant laborers and the working poor who have entered the state might resort to criminal activities. So where do you see this stimulus actually alleviating the position of these states like Bihar, Jharkhand, and Uttar Pradesh?
Okay. See, I think I have a very different opinion on this. I feel that the entire DBT thing, direct benefit transfer, or the JAM Trinity, Jandan, Aadhaar, and Mobile, has contributed a lot in reducing the effect of corruption, because the entire focus has shifted from giving cash or transferring to the states and waiting to trickle down effect to happen. That's an issue because accounts are dormant. I'll come to that later. But DBT has, I think, to a major extent, has addressed this issue of money going to the wrong person or the wrong individual and they siphoning off funds and all that. I'm not saying it's completely over. It's not happening. Might be happening. I have not come across, or so I'll not say. I cannot comment on that. But yes, it has been reduced to a lot of extent because the economic survey and the budget report of the government says so. Now, the problem with these Hindi belts, even if you give them fiscal stimulus, is that they are doing gap filling, which I have said earlier also. Even if you give them money, that money is not being used to generate or create anything or any entrepreneur, any enterprise, or giving them job. It is being used to help people survive. So that is the major issue. If you use that money to start a self-sustaining job or enterprise, or give it to SHGs where a lot of women are involved in employment, and there's a lot of successful SHGs if you see in states like Bihar and Jharkhand that nobody talks about. So Bihar and Jharkhand has amazing stories when it comes to SHGs. But the problem is that they comprise a very minute or very minimum or a very minuscule portion. So the problem is that even if you give money or stimulus to states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, and Hindi belt, the problem is that the money is being used to just survive. It's not creating any tangible asset. It's not creating any jobs. So it's like you are taking loan to feed yourself. And then you are again taking loan to feed yourself. That will not solve the issue. It might keep you alive. It might keep you on your feet. It might keep you healthy. I'm saying, and that is important because that is also a priority. You can do anything only when you are alive. Only if your body is fit, your mind is fit. So that is also important. But what after that? So the problem of not being able to create jobs is a major issue in states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh. Talking about Kerala and Tamil Nadu, there are a lot of SHGs. There are fishery industry. There's so many small scale industries operating in these southern states, which makes them sustainable, self-sustainable. They can go on. A little money is needed, and you'll see somebody started a shop, or somebody has rearing into livestock. Somebody is in sericulture. Somebody is in fishery. So it's I think more about the mindset also, and the literacy rate or the condition, financial and the educational and the social background of these people also. If you see this hinterland or the Hindi hinterland, the mindset is to be an employee, not an employer. The mindset is to work for someone else. The mindset is not to be an entrepreneur or an employer. That is why initiatives like Stand Up India, Startup India were not as successful as they were in other states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, and southern states, because the entire socio-economic and the cultural background differs. Surviving is a major task in states like this. That's why if you give money to these people, these states, it's been just used to survive. It's been used to give food to people. And geographically also, see, it's a debatable, we can go on and on about this, but these states are geographically have issues also. Bihar has a perennial issue of flood. Jharkhand has most of the industries after being divided from Bihar. But if you see, having said that, I'd like to point out and ask people to think about it, that most of the states in India are also the poorest states in India. That cannot be a coincidence. States like Jharkhand, states like Chhattisgarh, states like Odisha, with 3 states comprise of most of the iron ore, coal and zinc and mica and most of the resources in the country, metal, are the 3 most poorest states of the country. So I'll not say it's a coincidence. There is a lot of sociological and economic reason behind it. So even if this fiscal stimulus is given, like Manrega, if you see the problem of Manrega, in my earlier, just 5 minutes back, I said Manrega, 40,000 crore has been added to by Manrega. But a major criticism of Manrega is that it does not create any tangible asset. बारिश के सीजन में रोड बनता है, अभी मॉनसून आएगा, रोड खत्म हो जाएगा, चल जाएगा, फिर उसी रोड को बनाने के लिए फिर से मनरेगा में उसी एम्प्लॉय उन्हीं लोगों को लिया जाएगा. So you're not doing anything productive, and it's a waste of taxpayers' money. Our Prime Minister said this in Lok Sabha that Manrega is what, I'm forgetting the word, but I'll keep it alive. It's a sham, and just to show to the world that how unsuccessful it is, I'll keep it alive. And it's the same Manrega which is helping right now. And it's the same Manrega where the government has pumped 40,000 crores. Having said that, I'll say that you need to create employment opportunities. You need to make these people more skilled. Problem of skilled labor is not only limited to Hindi belts. It is all over India. 90% of our workforce is unskilled. That's why that's what we said in our last discussion also. Everybody is so excited Apple will come to India. All companies from China will come to India. Who will manufacture an iPhone? Because in the pyramid structure, there is a race to the bottom. 90% of your labor force is unskilled. So who will manufacture the iPhone even if Apple comes to India? And the focus of the fiscal stimulus or the focus of the policy should be to make policies which are viable so that these people see India as a destination. Factories, companies who are moving from China are going to Asian nations. Why? Because they see a consistency in the government's policy there. They see that their policy has been decided, it will be consistent at least for 10-15 years, and that has been their history. They don't tinker with their policies every now and then. आज DTA ले आएंगे, कल GAR ले आएंगे, कल retrospective taxation कर देंगे. Corporates don't like uncertainty. So this entire idea that they will come and they will create job, India फिर सोने की चिड़िया हो जाएगी, it's not feasible, it's not viable. You need to skill your people. You need to provide them education, financial literacy. And you will be surprised to know that in a state like Bihar, people, even if they're not literate, they are very much financially literate. They know the problems of using a debit card. I have witnessed this firsthand. Shop में गया, COVID time में, somebody swiped his card. The shopkeeper said, PIN बताइए. नहीं, हम अपना PIN खुद डालेंगे. नहीं, कोरोना है, I will not allowed to touch. नहीं, हम खुद डालेंगे. So they had this understanding. Saying that they don't understand is not right. But the reason behind this dormant account is they don't have jobs. You can give them money once. You cannot keep on giving them money. Now you need to create jobs. That's why I said you can teach a man, or you can either get him a fish, or you can teach a man how to fish. So that needs to be the attitude. That needs to be the approach.
That's a fair point. I agree with you. There's a lot of political uncertainty. There's a lot of probably lack of skill. But I would like your specific response on this issue of. So while you focus on, say, probably the fault of the people in terms of not being skilled enough and geographical limitations of these states, I would like you to specifically respond to this problem of feudalism in these states such as Bihar and Jharkhand and Uttar Pradesh, where, like I told you, there is a problem of rent seeking where the entire assistance in terms of monetary fiscal stimulus is going to the accounts of civil servants or the local councillors or political party leaders or ministers. So how do you see, or whether or not do you see this as a problem? And if this is a problem, if this is contributing to the entire domain of, say, any kind of development, how do we tackle this? Because this is an institutional problem. This is a political problem that we have to change. So where do we see this improving?
See, I think we have already, the government, and we have been working on this for quite some time. This entire idea of going digital, this entire idea of empowering the local authorities, bypassing the state government and empowering the panchayats and the municipal corporations, have been with this. The intention has been exactly this, that to avoid political people and to avoid civil servants and to directly give people money to the people who are in the position to use it, panchayats. That's why state like Bihar have 33% reservation for women in panchayat, for sarpanch. Their constituency reserved for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, that only these people will contest elections for panchayats. So things are changing. These things are only done because they are the major stakeholders. Political representation is a very massive boost. Everything starts from there. So DBT, JAM Trinity, all this were focused entirely on this area to cut the this long gestation period of money reaching the proper person, and to reduce this entire problem of corruption. I'm not saying it's completely over. It's still there, but it has been reduced. But yes, still a lot has to be done. The government should pay a lot of attention to the fact that giving cylinders under Ujjwala once, and then the person not being able to refill her cylinder is not the viable option. You need to create something, that create a situation, create a environment or a climate in this country where if you give cylinder once as a dole, the person should be independent or self-sustaining in the nature that she can go on refilling on her own. आपने एक बार दे दिया, उसके बाद आपने जाके देखा नहीं कि उसका क्या situation है. Same with the Jan Dhan account. You have opened the account, but how these people are going to put money in that account if they don't have any jobs? So these things need to be taken care of. So that's why I said this fiscal stimulus has its heart at the right place, and they have focused on the supply side. They have not focused on the demand side, and that was a deliberate decision. I'm not saying they have unintentionally done it. They have done it intentionally, waiting for the right period, but providing money, grains, and universalizing the ration. And then there's a RERA modification. Then there is changing the definition of MSMEs, and putting a stop to this extension of registration and completion dates for projects under RERA. These are good moves. But yes, there are certain other moves which were good, like this entire plan of helping the DISCOMs, the injection of 90,000 crore liquidity for DISCOMs, reforms in tariff policies, privatization of distribution in union territory. These were good measures. But you cannot use a pandemic to push your own agenda. FDI in defense, 74%. I don't know how it is going to make anybody Atmanirbhar if you open FDI in defense and 74%. But yes, fine. It's a COVID era. These policies which were stuck, the intention is good, fine. You can push it. But the main problem remains that what are we doing at the grassroots level? How it is helping in alleviating the condition of the poor and the downtrodden. That should be the major focus. And that has been the major criticism also. Other criticism is you are giving the people money to them, their own money, and you are calling it a stimulus. Like the deduction of TDS. You reduce the TDS from 10% to 8%. So the people will have more money in their hand, but their tax slab will increase. They will have to pay more tax. Giving their money, my own money to me, and calling it a package or a liquidity is not a correct thing to say. Like how the contribution in what is that? The pension scheme. You have said from 12% it will be 10%, so you will have more money. That is my money. If 12% would have been my contribution, I would be getting interest on 12%. But now you have reduced it to 10%. So my interest is gone. The money that I would have earned on that particular amount. So giving me my money and calling it a package, it does not make any sense to me. I'm pretty sure it does not make any sense to you also. That you reduce the 10% mandatory 12% of the Provident Fund contribution to 10%, and it will add liquidity of 6,700 crore. How it is government pumping the money? It is my money. So I think you understand what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, fair enough. I think all the points are pretty well made. And thank you for even summarizing what we have been talking about all this while. I'll just like to close this and probably move quickly to the questions and the comments that have come with one small example of how feudalism works in states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. And I am sure most of us already know about it.
I think we have a lot of questions. To take questions, Harshit.
Yes, I'll move to the questions. I'd just like to make a small point in the sense that even though we have the 73rd Amendment and we have representations and reservations for women of women in our gram panchayats, but we know the reality of those representation. We know that most of these women are either wives or relatives of the henchmen or the bahubalis of
True.
particular gram panchayat. And they are basically just substitutes for their husbands who are probably the big politicians of those areas. So that's a completely that's just a small point that I wanted to make. We'll quickly move to the questions now. And the first point, the first question that we have is from Satyam Prakash. Satyam says, "Sir, what do you think about FORCE, which is the Fiscal Options and Response to COVID-19 Epidemic Recommendations of the Indian Revenue Service on revenue mobilization and economic impetus to fight COVID-19?" So probably we can direct this to somebody who is already in the Indian Revenue Services. This one is a tricky one, if you want to take it.
Yeah, fine. I'll take it. I don't mind. See, as I said again, the intention was right, but the modus operandi was not right. There is a proper channel while you move in a government machinery and bureaucracy. That should have been done. But the suggestions were fine. They're nice. They were good suggestions. Like I remember one suggestion where it says that we should impose COVID cess. Okay. Now the government is trying to come up with GST calamity cess. So it's almost the same thing. So the suggestions were nice. Revenue mobilization is important. But I have an issue when you talk about taxing the rich. You cannot just go on saying that let's tax the rich. Because even if not in the same proportion, but the rich is equally hit by, not equally, I'll not say that word. I'll be very careful and talk about rich when Harshit is on the other side. But they're also hit to a certain extent. So taxing the rich is the most viable option. It is the most easy thing which comes on top of our head. That should not be the recourse. We should see long term. Taxing the rich in a country like India, where only 1% of the population pays income tax, you want to tax rich. What it will lead to? It will lead. A citizenry is more interested in paying proper that money. If you force a tax, if you come heavy-handedly on those people, they will find ways to not pay that tax, not pay those taxes. So you need to take these stakeholders into consideration. You cannot just say we will just tax the rich. They will find ways to evade it. They will find ways to plan it, if not evade it. So that is not the right way to go. But there were other suggestions also, which were really nice suggestions, which were good suggestions, and it got backfired because of the way it was presented. It should have gone through proper channel. It should have gone by taking into the ministry and the bosses into confidence. You just don't go declaring to the press that these are this. That before doing the work, they are trying to get more on social media. Everywhere you go, there is somebody who is carrying a camera. So even if you're feeding a poor or feeding a dog. So that is the problem, coming to the topic. But the suggestions were nice. I've read the entire recommendation. The suggestions were nice, and government is thinking on those lines. The example being GST calamity cess. So I don't think there's any issue with that.
Okay, moving to the next question. Rajarshi has a question where the question says, what if NBFCs are not able to repay bank loans as their MSMEs borrowers are not able to honor their liabilities? I think this is something that we have dealt with at length in our discussion. But if you would like to give a short response to this, probably a minute long response.
See, the package says that the government has given a credit guarantee of 100% on these loans, both on principal as well as interest. It means that in case of a default, the bank or the NBFC facing the default can cash in the guarantee from the central government and get paid instead of incurring losses. So that part is covered. So don't worry about it. But saying that MSME borrowers are not able to honor their liabilities, I think it's a generalization which we should not make, because these people are the major contributor to the economy. As I said, MSME almost absorb 60 to 70% of the workforce, and they contribute almost 60 to 65% to the GDP. So making this assumption that they are not able to honor their liabilities is not I will not get into that. It should not be the idea here. But even if I assume that what you said is right, they are 100% credit backed, 100% credit guarantee loans and backed by the government. So don't worry about it. Next.
Naveen Mehta has a question. Suppose even if we give money directly to poor people, there are many issues like number one, how will we identify a person in need of money and how will we make the cash available to the people everyone doesn't have account? Okay. Number two, if we give certain 1,000 rupees, people already have loans from their neighbors in the period of lockdown and they will consume it to eat, but people won't get a future benefits. It will take a lot of time to reach the poor. Would you still like to deal with it, or do you think we have already discussed on these points?
I think we have dealt with it, but I'll again like to summarize. See, that's why the DBT and the JAM and the Jandhan was there. Finance Minister very categorically said that who doesn't have a bank account these days? Okay, so we will not get into that people don't have a bank account. Everybody has bank account these days. And the second point is a very good point. That's what Harshit also said, and I also commented on, that creating a self-sustaining model is more important. But the problem in states like Bihar, UP is that you give money, they consume. But even if they do that, as I have already pointed out, it's a consumption-driven economy. It will still go a long way of helping the Indian economy. And I don't think it will take a lot of time to reach poor. That's because the entire DBT concept is that if the money is directly reaching to the person who needs it, there's no middleman, there is no money lender involved. You can go to the bank or any ATM and you can withdraw the money. And there is some bank mitra concept also, if you guys know, that in remote, inaccessible areas, there are bank representatives going on bikes and cycles and distributing money to these people who have money in their account. So I think we have covered that.
Okay, moving to the next question from Vivek. Number one, is it good to give more loans when RBI has already waived off 68,607 crores of bank defaulters? Number two, can this be said? No collaterals for these new loans may lead to speculative investment. Number three, will disinvestment of PSUs will help in any form to our economy? If yes, then how?
Okay, first point, waiving off, write off, two different things, a lot of technicality. They have they have written off those loans from their books, but does not mean they have let go of those defaulters. Money will be taken from those defaulters. So it's not that the RBI has forgotten about those 68,000 crores. They have written it off from their books.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a little technical, but just to summarize, the money is not gone. They'll be paying it. It's not gone. No collateral for these new loans. No, I don't think it will lead to speculative investment. Just because the collateral is not there does not mean you don't have to present a plan to the bank for getting loans. You just cannot go swinging both your hands and say, listen, I have no collateral, I just want loan. There has to be a plan. There has to be proper paperwork. There has to be everything for banks to give loans. So I don't think it will lead to speculative investment. And I don't understand what you say speculative investment. Every business is speculative at one point of time when you are starting it. You are gambling it, you are taking a risk. So when you take risk, it's speculation already. So every business is speculation. Every business is a risk. And this is what the business is all about, to assess those risks. And will this investment of PSU will help in? Yes, it will, because government's major target is that gap, which I said in my discussion 15 minutes back, that the major gap filling of those revenue shortage was arguments for both the sides. But if PSU disinvestment can bring some money to the coffers of the government and can make them more accountable and can make them more proactive and more answerable, and then make them more modern, then I don't think there is any harm. If you disinvest, there are shareholders involved. Earlier, only government is involved. So PSU answering to the government. But if there are shareholders involved, if you and me are involved, then the company is accountable to you and me. They're answerable to you and me. So it's a good thing. And it helped bridging the gap of the revenue deficit gap of the government. So every country does it. So I don't see any harm in doing that.
I think we have that's all that we have for questions. We have a last comment from Ishan, where he says, a great economist of his time, Milton Friedman, famously observed, one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than the results. So would you like to comment on that, or?
No, if Milton Friedman has said, then who am I to comment?
Yes, I think if a great economist has already pronounced his judgment, I don't think a civil servant should go ahead and uh, object to that. So I think with that we have finished all the questions and all the discussions that we have that we had.
I think I'd like to call in Debjyoti. Debjyoti, if you can come in and discuss, can give an explain what we have planned, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Hi, good evening, everyone.
Yeah, hi, go on.
So I think there's a couple of things that me and Chandan, I think Chandan and Harshit have also sort of spoken about it. That at a minimum, what Chandan wants to do is, I think, quite a decent service to the legal, to at least law students and law aspirants who want to go and become law students in the law schools. Because what the plan is to discuss 20 essential cases that constitutional based primarily, which every law student and in fact even non-law students should know, because it's sort of touches upon a lot of their own fundamental rights and their understanding of how they can apply those rights and so on. Like, for instance, we were having a small discussion about how privacy and what is the extent of privacy and so on. I mean, not today. I mean, on a phone call. And how people just know that there is a right to privacy, but perhaps just absolutely have no idea the extent to which it goes and to the extent to which it doesn't go, for example. So we're definitely going to come up with a more detailed plan, and it will be shared with pretty much all of you. That's one of the things. The other thing, I think Harshit is already coordinating in terms of the moot court. I think, do you want me to discuss that also?
I think I have not spoken about it at all. I think, in fact, neither Chandan nor I have spoken about it. So probably you can go ahead and tell
Yes.
the audience what exactly are we planning to do.
So on the 20 case thing, me and Chandan had spoken that
Yeah.
we want to discuss with everyone. But on the moot court thing, Chandan, do you want me to talk about that also today?
Yeah, you can go. You can. I don't mind. Go on.
So, especially for all the students who are currently in law school, me and Chandan are going to jointly do, say, about 5 to 7 sessions on covering both